Two planes of Delta Airlines collided on the taxiway at LaGuardia Airport in New York City on Wednesday night, with the wing of one aircraft striking the cockpit window of the other. The airline said that it was a low-speed collision between the two Bombardier CRJ-900 jets in which one flight attendant was injured. The Federal Aviation Administration said that Flight 5047 was taxiing to its gate when it struck Flight 5155. It said that air traffic control had instructed Flight 5155 to hold and yield to the other plane. And the incident happened at the intersection of two taxiways. Flight 5155 was carrying 28 passengers and 4 crew members, while Flight 5047 was carrying 57 passengers and 4 crew members. The National Transportation Safety Board is now investigating what went wrong. This incident is particularly worrying since very advanced surface radar systems are in place at LaGuardia. And this close call comes months after a deadly air crash in the US earlier this year when a US Army Black Hawk helicopter collided mid-air with an American Airlines jet over the Potomac River near Washington, D.C. All 67 people on board the two aircraft, 64 on the jet and 3 in the helicopter, were killed. And about a year and a half back, a runway collision at Tokyo's Haneda airport had also raised concerns over a gap in alerting technology. All 379 people on board a Japan Airlines Airbus A350 escaped narrowly after a collision with a Dash 8 Coast Guard turboprop that killed 5 of 6 crew members on the smaller aircraft. It was classified as a runway incursion. What that means, we'll come to in just a bit. Now, all these incidents are sad reminders of the worst ever aviation disaster in history by the number of fatalities. Of course, an accident, not a terrorist strike, because many more were killed in the 9/11 attacks. And today, we go deep into the runway collision at Tenerife Island in 1977. But before that, I have an appeal. ThePrint won the support of discerning viewers and readers like you because of its responsible and high-quality granular coverage. But this quality of journalism requires resources, and that means we need viewers and readers like you to consider taking subscriptions to support our work. Subscriptions to ThePrint come with a host of special privileges which you can find in the description below. I urge you to support us and help us produce more quality work. Now, let me tell you the unfortunate story of Tenerife. Tenerife is part of the Canary Islands, which are off the northwest coast of Africa, and it falls in Spanish territory. On March 27, 1977, a Boeing 747-200 operated by KLM from Amsterdam to Las Palmas and a Boeing 747-100 operated by Pan American Airways from Los Angeles to Las Palmas via New York were both diverted to Los Rodeos in Tenerife. Why did this happen? That's another sensational story in itself. Las Palmas is also part of the Canary Islands, and a group of terrorists had set off a small bomb at the airport's flower shop earlier that day. They did this because they wanted to force the Spanish government to recognize the Canary Islands as a separate entity and negotiate independence. Naturally, as soon as the bombing happened, the Las Palmas airport was shut, and the two jumbo jets were among many aircraft that were diverted to the small Tenerife airport. Once the threat at Las Palmas was handled, the airport was reopened. But the two jets never reached Las Palmas. They collided on the ground in Tenerife and 583 people were killed. What exactly happened? Why did such big jets not spot each other in the middle of the day on the ground? Why did ATC not catch it? Why did the sensors not catch it? Let's take a look. The 50-year-old KLM captain had 11,700 hours of flying experience. He was also the airline's chief flying instructor. The 56-year-old captain of the Pan Am aircraft had 21,043 flying hours. The investigation found that because there were so many aircraft at the small island airport, it wasn't possible to park all of them properly. When Las Palmas reopened, the Pan Am aircraft was already in a position to take off. But it could not get clearance as the KLM aircraft was parked in front of it, blocking its access to the runway. The captain of the KLM jet had decided to refuel the aircraft so that a refueling would not be needed at Las Palmas before flying back to Amsterdam. As a result, the KLM aircraft was set to depart before the Pan Am aircraft. Now, Picture this. The KLM 747 was instructed by the ATC to taxi down the runway and make a 180-degree turn so it could face the direction of the takeoff. And it did precisely this. This procedure is called backtracking. Now, the weather at Tenerife wasn't great, especially due to its elevation of 2000 feet. Once the KLM reached the end of the runway, the Pan Am was supposed to follow the KLM but not go all the way to the end of the strip. It was supposed to take an exit, exit number C3 to be precise, and then use a parallel taxiway to go and line up behind the KLM for takeoff. But this did not go to plan. The Pan Am did enter the runway as planned and started taxiing down the pathway, but it struggled to identify the exit in poor visibility. It was still in the middle of the runway and the two jumbo jets were facing each other but could not see each other because of the dense fog. The small airport was also not equipped with a ground radar, and we'll talk about how the ground radars work in the present day situations right at the end. After the KLM 747 reached its position, the captain started applying power for takeoff. The first officer noticed this and told him that clearance was still pending from the ATC. Then they sought clearance and the ATC replied, giving instructions but for when the aircraft was actually in the air. But there was no clarity on when to begin rolling on the ground for the takeoff. When the first officer said they were ready for takeoff, the ATC said, "Stand by for takeoff." It is believed that due to interference in the radio, a part of this sentence wasn't clear. Now, what was happening in the Pan Am cockpit at this point? The pilots in the Pan Am heard the communication between the KLM and the ATC and tried to alert everyone about their presence on the runway. This communication was also not clear since there was already a lot of chaos at the airport because of the long line of waiting jets, the bad weather, and the limited facilities at the airport. At this point, the KLM 747 begins rolling. The ATC asks the Pan Am crew to call when they have cleared the runway. The flying engineer on the KLM 747 hears this and raises the alarm with the captain. The captain disregards this and continues with the takeoff. And seconds before the collision, the Pan Am jet sees the KLM 747 and applies maximum thrust to somehow get off the runway. The KLM also tries to leave the ground earlier than planned to avoid hitting the Pan Am jet. And this was the moment of the biggest disaster in aviation history. While the nose of the KLM cleared the Pan Am jet, its right engines hit the front part of the fuselage of the jet on the ground. The main gear hit the center of the fuselage, and once this happened, the KLM jet lost the very little lift it had and crashed about 150 meters later, dragging down another 300 meters. Do keep in mind that the aircraft was full with fuel. The runway became a disaster zone as soon as the collision happened at 5:06 p.m. local time. 61 people on the Pan Am aircraft, including the flight crew, managed to survive, escaping through the left wing and openings in the fuselage. But everyone else on the Pan Am jet and all people on the KLM lost their lives. 583 people in total. The next highest aviation disaster toll is 520, which was the result of the Japan Airlines Flight 123 crash. Now, the investigation showed that the KLM captain was in great haste to take off, and he took off without clearance. In its message to the captain over the radio, ATC Tower had explicitly said, "Stand by for takeoff." It also found that in reply to the flight engineer's query as to whether the Pan Am airplane had already left the runway, the captain had emphatically said that it had. Now, how is it possible that a pilot with the technical capacity and the experience of the KLM captain, whose state of mind during the stopover of Tenerife seemed perfectly normal, committed one of the most basic errors? The investigation said that an explanation could be found in a series of factors. A growing feeling of tension as the problems for the captain continued to build up was a big factor. He knew that on account of the strictness in the Netherlands regarding the limitation of duty time, if he did not take off within a short period, he might have to interrupt the flight. This would upset KLM's scheduling and would inconvenience the passengers. Moreover, the weather conditions at the airport were getting rapidly worse, and it had a big role to play. What frequently makes visibility difficult is not always fog, but layers of low-lying clouds which are blown by the wind and cause sudden and radical changes in visibility. The fact that two important radio transmissions were happening at the same time was another big factor. The standby for takeoff, I will call you from the tower, coincided with the Pan Am's we are still taxiing down the runway. A whistling sound which interfered with the communication lasted for about 3 seconds. Then there was also the inadequate language that was used. When the KLM co pilot repeated the ATC clearance, he ended with the words, "We are now at takeoff." The controller, who had not granted any takeoff clearance, did not understand that they were taking off. The OK from the tower, which preceded the standby for takeoff, was also incorrect. There was also the very important fact that the Pan Am airplane had not left the runway at the decided intersection. And obviously, there was the unusual traffic congestion. This forced the airport to rely on ground traffic measures and actions that were not standard. Basically, total chaos, the perfect storm. And the trail of this tragedy lingers on even to this day. Now, this was classified as a runway incursion. According to the FAA, any incident at an aerodrome involving the incorrect presence of an aircraft, vehicle, or a person on the protected area of a surface designated for the landing and takeoff of aircraft is classified as a runway incursion. A surface incident is an unauthorized or unapproved movement within the designated area. There are four categories of runway incursions. Category A, which is a serious incident. Category B, in which separation decreases and there is a significant potential for collision. Category C, which is an incident characterized by ample time and distance to avoid a collision. And Category D, which indicates incorrect presence of a single vehicle, person, or an aircraft on the protected area. We said earlier that we'll also talk about the ground radar. A ground radar is a critical safety system at airports that is used to track aircraft and vehicle movement. It helps air traffic controllers prevent collisions, runway incursions, and miscommunication by giving them a real-time map of all ground movements. Modern systems combine radar with ADS-B signals for greater accuracy. New York's LaGuardia Airport, for example, one of the busiest in the US, is equipped with advanced surface movement radars and multi-layer sensors that allow controllers to monitor every movement with precision, even in the dense traffic conditions. The airport in Tenerife had none of this, and investigators are still to figure out how these systems did not prevent the LaGuardia incident on Wednesday night.